Hey, well, good morning and welcome to Crossbridge, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're sitting on the left side of the couch or the right side or stuck on the floor, we're so glad you're here. And if you're visiting with us, this is actually an excellent day for you to be participating in our worship session because we're going to be walking through our core values today and next week, and then also looking at our mission statement, why we do what we do. And so I'm Jordan, I'm a young adults pastor. This is Kim, our Next Steps pastor. Trevor, our youth pastor. And the man, the myth, the legend himself, Brad, our lead pastor.
And we just thought this would be a great way just to kind of refresh our memory at the end of this tough year that we have had, is just to kind of help us refocus why we do what we do, who we are as a church. Yeah. And so as we look at these core values, church is kind of a different kind of business, if you will. If you're working at some place that makes televisions, you know what the product's supposed to be. As a church, we also have that. We have a goal in mind of where we're trying to get people to go. How we're trying to affect lives. So, with that, that's kind of why we're talking about this today.
Yeah, and we actually met 3 or 4 years ago in Fishers when we kind of revamped all of these, and we put a bunch of phrases on the board of things that we were all passionate about, and we all came up with different things. And these are the areas that really kind of defined what we do.
So the place we have to start is really our mission statement. And this is a statement that we run everything that we do in all of our individual ministries through. So this is the who we are and what we're trying to accomplish. And that is transforming lives by helping people take next steps with God. And hopefully you've heard that before. Transforming lives by helping people take next steps with God. And I think we have to actually unpack that a little bit.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we say things so many times it becomes so cliche and people are like, what does that really, really mean? And it's one of the reasons why I asked to be called the Next Steps pastor, because then I get to, whenever I walk with someone, I get to say, okay, where are you at? And what is something that you think Jesus calls you to go? Where does he call you to go? What is the next thing that you think he's asking you to do?
Right. And when we're talking about transformed lives, I mean, I ask myself, and I hope that we're all asking ourselves, am I different today than I was even yesterday, or this week than last week, or let's just face it, this year? Right. Are we different now than when we started this year? And hopefully it's in a positive way. So our lives are always transforming. There's always growth to be had, no matter how long you've been walking with Jesus.
Right, and sometimes when we hear that can be a little bit intimidating. And so actually I want to spin this question to Trevor, and we'll start with the teens and then work our way up a little bit in the age groups. But Trevor, you've always said that there's one thing when teens graduate that you want them to kind of understand, that you want them to get, that they're passionate about a relationship with Jesus. And would you explain kind of that as your next step process with teenagers?
Yeah, and so one thing I've said all along is that our goal, and really I think this translates to the church, but our goal is to help people have real experiences with God.
Yeah.
And when you have a real experience with God, when you really understand, and part of what I talked about during the Christmas series, when you really understand what Jesus did, who God is, you can't help but be changed because of that.
Right.
And so, yeah, with teens, our goal is to get them to have real experiences with God. So by the time they graduate, they don't have a choice but to follow God, because where else would you go?
Right. And then moving into the young adults, which is my area, there's always a few things that when we're walking with people, I think when you get to the 18 to 30-year-old range, you start having your own bills, you start having your own jobs, your own families and stuff like that. And priorities, I guess, is the best way to kind of define it for me. Is my biggest thing when I'm pushing this age group is for us to realign our priorities to either that of a child, like we say Jesus have, or even that of our elders, who are often so vigilant, always able to define kind of where they're going and their next step and stuff. And so for next steps with me, when I push our age groups, is spending more time alone with God, saying, hey, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 15, an hour, 2 hours, whatever that next step is, being more generous in our giving, which we all can be better at, and then also becoming servants and servant leadership, which has been a lot more difficult in 2020 with things being shut down, not just churches, but also non-for-profits. And then we go, Kim, to kind of individuals who are struggling and suffering, and that in and of itself is a whole different type of next step.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't look at anything small as not being important or a huge step in God's
Absolutely.
eyes. And so you can even look at, I realize with people in my own life that being still is the next step.
Right.
So it's like the opposite of what you think, but it's like, I need to take time to slow everything down so I hear from God, so I know what He's saying to me. And so too many times we think we've got to go, we've got to do, we've got to be better, which is really our culture.
Right.
But Jesus is like, hold on a second, remember it's about me, so we have to filter everything through Jesus. So transforming lives has really nothing to do with us doing, it's about us being and saying, Jesus, what do you want from me? And so I have loved with individuals, especially those who are suffering, to go, hold on a second. You don't have to make everything right now. You need to just slow down. You need to just listen. Sometimes you need to take a nap.
Right.
And that might be the most, like, I've heard people say, the
Right.
most spiritual thing you can do. So yeah, every step.
I have no problem with naps personally, but that's but I love that. And I think sometimes when you look at our mission statement, we get a lot of that, but when we get to this next steps with God, well, what is next steps? And that's what we all try to do with all of these age groups and even with adults. And I think a better way for me that I've understood this is that a next step with God is even more specific of getting you to a Christ-centered life. That means my marriage is Christ-centered. That means my workplace, everything I do, as I understand, it's just not a part of what I do. This is who I am. This is what we're doing. It's a Christ-centeredness in every aspect. Our marriages, our finances, our workplace, our families, you name it. That's where we are transforming lives by helping people take next steps with God. And so then we said, hey, well, how do we break that down? What's that look like? And Kim, why don't you just read our very first core value?
Right, and I love these because honestly, I think these help encompass what our mission statement is. So they break it down
Right.
a little bit more specifically. And the first one, which has a lot to do with next steps, is that we will live life as a journey. And that means that God is writing a story and is intensely interested in you joining that story. Growth in your journey is more important than where you are in that process. So we will focus on helping you take your next step.
Yeah, I love that very first statement. God is writing a story and is intensely interested in you joining that story, because we honestly have that choice.
Yes.
We have a choice whether we're going to, God's doing what He's going to do, and are we willing to jump into that story? Are we willing to say, you know what, I will take the chance, I will step out, I will, when it's scary, do those kind of things.
Right, and it can be something that, as we hear journey, one again can be intimidating, or when we are going through the hills and the valleys of that story, we often find ourselves in the real life moments kind of checking out during the valley parts of things. And Jesus truly has invited us. You see Peter talk about it. You see Paul talk about it. You see Jesus say that, hey, if you're signed up, you have to carry your cross each and every single day.
Every day,
And
yeah.
that's in and of itself what some of those next steps look like. But the journey then also includes the relationship part of it, which we're going to talk about here in just a second as well.
Right.
Yeah, I love the word story though, because I mean, when you think about a story, like what goes into making a good story, right? There's conflict, there's these climax, there's character development, there's all these different things, right, that we learn about in middle school English class or whatever. But when you think about the story, like God doesn't call us to this boring, mundane story.
great.
Like you wouldn't
Yeah.
read the book about somebody who, oh, they got the job out of college and then they bought a car and a house and like that's really
Everything's
cool.
fine, everything's working
Right.
beautifully.
And
Right.
so often that's our goal and our focus. And we talk about these next steps, like God really is inviting us into a story and a journey. You read the Bible and it's fascinating. I love the Old Testament because of all the stories that come out of it and all the things that people go through and the ups and the downs. And that's the invitation I think that God does. These next steps are a journey, are a story, and they're supposed to be something that you would want to read,
Right.
that you would want to watch if it was a movie. And so often that's just not what our life looks like.
Yeah,
Right,
that's great
right.
stuff.
And I love too that within the story there are the valleys and there are the hills, and sometimes I'll find people either want to reach out to God more in the valley or want to reach out to God more in the hill.
Yep.
Like it seems like we either go one or the other, but the truth of the matter is He is with us every single step of the way. And what the enemy wants to do is have us compare ourselves to other people's journeys and other people's stories. And yet God says, no, hold on. And just like our statement says, is it doesn't matter where you are in the process, because Jesus is right there with you. Like he's with someone else over here. He's with someone else over here. But with you, he's saying, hold on a second. I'm here with you. I'm going to help you take your next step. It doesn't matter what John's doing or Mary's doing.
And we're so programmed almost to compare ourselves, especially with all the social media and everything, is that how are we doing compared to somebody else? Yeah.
Yes,
That's a
and
great
that
point.
totally gets our minds off of our own story and where Jesus is. And so we have to completely, pray against that and say, God, help me focus on where I am and where you are and what you want of me
Do you
personally.
think part of that is, though, is because some people don't realize that they are so unique, that God has something unique for them? They look at everybody else and say, well, I want to do what they're doing. But
Right.
no, God has something for you. And finding that is sometimes very difficult.
It
I think
is.
it's really scary too,
That
is.
is so true. It's
Yeah.
scary. Yeah.
because there's nothing God wants us to do that we can really do on our own,
Right, right.
which is terrifying. And so taking those steps, like,
You have to
it's
trust
hard.
him.
Yeah.
And this will be the last thing we'll talk about this, but I love this that we put in here. So we will focus on helping you take your next step. And just as you said that's scary, we may come across as pushing a little bit of that, and we don't really apologize for that, do we?
No, because what we know is that we see when we're kind of outside of someone else and we're called to minister, we can see what's down the road a little bit further to know. I promise you, if it's God calling you, it might be a struggle, but you're going to have more joy
Absolutely.
in your life than before.
Exactly. And so that's one reason why we push so hard about being in the process and taking these next steps. What's the challenge? Where are you scared to take that next step? Where is God pushing you to take that next step? I love that. So, Trevor, why don't you go into the second core value and talk a little bit about this one?
Yeah, and this one even has taken on a little bit of a new meaning for me as we've talked about loneliness and
Right.
coming out of the mental health stuff. Like, even just realizing how big of a deal that is. And so this one's even a little bit more special now. But it says, we will live in relationship. Your journey should intersect and impact other people's journeys, even when it's messy. Interconnecting your journey is the best way to make a positive impact in your community and world. And I think that's something that we all need reminded of. So often you're talking about comparing to other people, and we read the Bible, and I know a lot of people think about who Paul was as a person, all these different people in the Bible, and think that who are we and what is our story and why do we matter? But that's why we love doing the journey videos and sharing people's stories, because we're all real people who have gone through real things. And God has helped us through, whether it seems big or small, God has helped us come through things and overcome things. And sharing that with other people is often a great way to realize, but also to make an impact on somebody else.
And you're helping. You've been through something. Maybe God has brought you through a struggle, a trouble, a tragedy, whatever it is. How much you're helping others who may be going through that exact same thing. And I love this whole emphasis. And you'll probably notice that a lot of these core values, they all intertwine. When you look at all of them, they all have something to do with each other. And I love that we should be making an impact in other people. And I think that is just absolutely crucial.
Right, yeah. C.S. Lewis has one of my favorite quotes where he says that friendship is born at the moment you turn to somebody and you both say, you too.
Yeah.
You ask the question.
Definitely.
Where relationship is so key for the journey, for the mission of taking next steps, because when you're able to be vulnerable with another human being and relate in the joys, the sufferings, it opens up just the amount of potential you both can have.
Absolutely.
And we've talked all the time, I know, Kim, especially when you're meeting with those who have lost loved ones, and the grief journey, just to be able to help individuals who have suffered because we have suffered.
Absolutely.
It makes it so much easier to be able to do so effectively.
Right, exactly. And I think, the relationship can be formed if you, like Brad, you said, like you've gone through some similar things, but also as you get vulnerable and share, hey, I want to let you know that you may feel caught in a trap of like some type of sin or something. Don't worry, me too. I've gone through some things. I've done some things wrong. There are some people in our lives that we need to be honest with and vulnerable with and say, I'm not a perfect person. I may be a pastor, but that doesn't mean I'm perfect.
Absolutely.
And so anything that we can do to help another person see that they're normal, but there's an ability to find Jesus more in this when you're vulnerable, when you're honest, when you're authentic than ever before.
And there's a next step.
There's
You know,
a next
going
step.
back
That's
to-
a next step. And again, it's like the next steps aren't always something like, oh my goodness, I'm going to Africa to be a missionary.
Right.
It may be, and I try to do this with people, I will stop them and I'll say, that was a victory. You just opened up and you shared a struggle. You shared a temptation or a thought life issue. That's a victory. You shed light on it. I mean, people think it's got to be this huge thing, and it's actually, in God's eyes, it is a huge thing, but to them it might not be.
The last thing I want to talk about with this one is that even when it's messy, and that is one thing that I think so many times, you know, we look at our schedules, we look at our families, and we say, you know what? I just want to take care of my own little things. I don't want to get messy with people. I am so guilty of that. You know, I just want my downtime. I want my peace and quiet at night. And there are times that we get messy.
Or the flip side of that too is we're the mess, or we're struggling, and we don't want to bring other people in.
Right.
And I think COVID-19 has kind of exposed that a lot for me. When that first 45 days of quarantine, I realized exactly how much I needed relationships and how much I missed the community impact of things because of how much I was struggling. But I mean, I'm an introvert. And so, like, the first 30 days, I was, like, living my best life of being in quarantine and trying, you know, avoiding people. And then I crashed, and I didn't realize that it was connected to I wasn't around anybody. And so I think as we're on this journey, one of the biggest things we can also do as the next step is to recognize we need friends.
Yes.
Like, we just need people in our lives who we can just be ourselves with, who we can unwind and not have any, you know, walls up, and we can talk about the tough stuff, but also joke about things. And I think that's so important.
So, Trevor, I'm sorry. Kid.
I'm sorry. No, you have to decide for yourself, like almost even pray about it and say, God, who are people that refresh me? Who are people that fill me up? And you need to have a few of those people around you. You don't have to have a ton, but you need to have a few of those people around you so that you're filled up to get messy at times and to reach out to others who need help.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about through the teen angle, if you will, about relationship and getting messy and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing the shift over the last 11 years that I've been here with teens, and just it almost feels like they've lost the importance and understanding of how important connections are in person. And with replacing a lot of these connections with digital connections or temporary connections, and seeing their schedules just fill up with all these other things, whether it's homework or sports or things. And it's interesting that at times I feel like I'm having to teach them how to have friendships again, how we have events built around this idea of just connecting and helping them understand that that's maybe the most spiritual thing they can do.
Yeah, that's right.
Is to just make these connections. And I think, yeah, like you're saying, so often we blow up. Next steps have to be this massive thing, but really it could just be this tiny thing.
Absolutely.
But one thing I do think is really cool with the teens and in this idea of relationship is I feel like a lot of them have really understood better than I ever have how next steps maybe aren't just about us. And they're also about the relationships that we have and how we can help other people along. And that's one thing that even though maybe they've struggled this idea of relationship, I think they've always done a great job of relating to other people and helping them. You look at our bridge kids or our C3 sports, like how many of them are teens who are giving of their time and
That's
volunteering.
right.
And so I think that's one thing that I've definitely learned from them is that we have to remember that next steps, like you're saying, aren't just about us. In this idea of relationships, maybe we can help each other take next steps and come alongside each other. And that's the beauty of relationships, is that we're walking together on this journey with God, and that all of us can be moving forward. And it's, if we'll miss that if we become just about ourselves.
That's right.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us today and whatnot. If you're feeling, kind of just a stir in your heart with anything that we talked about today, please private message us. We'd love to be able to connect with you that way on either our Facebook account or admin@crossbridgecommunity.org. A second thing is we're just so grateful for all of you who have continued to pray for the church, for the community, for the world, and then also give as well financially. And so if you feel called to do so today, you can do that on our website, crossbridgecommunity.org. But thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next week for the final 3 core values here at Crossbridge.